Today I'm replacing the front brake pads on a 2006 Toyota Prius. First thing you want to do, set the emergency brake, jack up the front of the vehicle and take the front wheels off. These two little divots here are the jacking point. Probably have some in the back too, but most cars have an indication like this of where to set the jack. After I got the right front wheel off, I turned the wheels to the right so it's easier for me to access these caliper bolts. Today we're just doing brake pads. Normally we would do brake pads and rotors or machine the rotors, but to be more cost effective, today we're just doing pads. There's no lip on the rotor. I don't believe it's under spec, and there's no pulsation when braking, so make your own determination. If we were doing rotors, we would take the whole caliper off, but because we're just doing pads, we're going to do just these two 14mm bolts. I like to compress the piston in the brake caliper a little bit by prying back like this. Makes it easier for it to slide off once I get the bolts loose. Another thing I like to do before I get too far into the process is double check that my new parts look like my old parts, because oftentimes I get the wrong parts. Then I have to stop what I'm doing and go back to the store, but these guys look good. So break loose these two upper and lower caliper 14mm bolts. Then we can lift the caliper off. Make sure you don't ever let it dangle by the brake hose because that can damage it. And next we will depress the piston so that there is room for the new pads. I usually use an old pad to do that so I don't scrape up the surface. So I put the old pad against the piston surface and then use channel locks to depress the piston all the way back into the caliper, basically until it won't go anymore. Another thing to pay attention to if you have wear indicator springs like this is which pad went where. You want to make sure that the rotor direction goes in the right direction so that it can catch the spring and squeak when it needs to. This one with the spring on the top came out of the backside. First we want to replace this hardware that came with our new brake pads. If we were going to replace new rotors too, we would take these two caliper bracket bolts off, pull this caliper bracket out of the way, then swap in the new rotor. Not too many more steps. Once we have the new brake pads and hardware in place, the last thing we want to do is lube up the slides. This is a floating caliper, so it floats back and forth. These are the sliding bolts, and if they get stuck, then the caliper will get stuck and your brake pad will wear on one side and wear prematurely. So I always pull these out, put a little silicone or some kind of grease on them, make sure they go in and out smoothly before putting the caliper back in place. Since this is a floating caliper, it can kind of sit at a weird angle. I always make sure that I get both bolts started before I tighten everything down. Once we've got it tightened down, we can put the wheel back on and go from there. Before you go on any test drive, hop in the vehicle and pump up the brakes. Basically, this is just bringing that piston back out that we compressed. Make sure you have a firm pedal. If you don't do this, then your test drive, your first brake depression could have the pedal go straight to the floor and you not stop. So always remember this important step. I also like to pop under the hood and check the brake fluid level. Sometimes people top it off, even though the level going down should match your brake pad, so the level is actually a wear indicator. This level looks good, and we didn't make any messes. The last step is torquing your lug nuts. Look up the spec for your specific vehicle. It's 80 foot-pounds for this one, so I set the torque wrench to 80 foot-pounds. Go around in a star pattern and torque all 5 lug nuts. Then I test drive the vehicle and repeat this procedure, especially the way that the rotor is sitting loose on there. Sometimes your wheel can be on cockeyed, and once you drive it loosens up, so it never hurts to double check the torque. If you don't have a torque wrench, you can stop by your local gas station or shop, and normally they will check it for you, no problem. that sums it up. Have a great day.